Thank you so much for joining us today for our expert talk on attracting and working with enterprise clients on Upwork. My name is Will Simpson, and I'm an event manager here at Upwork. Today, we are joined by Catalin Modorcea. Thank you so much for joining us today, Cata.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background for context?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with the most relevant thing for this particular webinar, which is my current role, and that is that I've been managing enterprise projects for close to 2 years now. So I've been quite involved in finding freelancers for various project needs, choosing freelancers, hiring them, working with them, and seeing projects through to completion. I'm also formally an Upwork ambassador for nearly 4 years. I've had that role, and I think that that's kind of really awarded me a nice opportunity to get to hear from so many freelancers, as Will, you also know very well, and to understand what freelancers' needs are, understand what quite often what questions they face and what challenges they face, and that's given me a lot of insight into that. And I've also been working myself independently for the past 9 years and counting. So I'm still a freelancer, even in the role that I have now. I have been for a very long time, and obviously I really enjoy being a freelancer, and now have this ability to see things from both the freelancer perspective and also the client perspective, which is quite helpful. So hopefully I can make the discussion today quite practical and help people out with their questions.
Absolutely.
A few personal facts about me. Like many freelancers, I imagine I love to travel and work. One of the great things about being in Europe is that you can very easily travel all across Europe. And one of the great things about being a freelancer is that you don't have to wait for your vacation time or to be able to travel. You can be able to travel and work, and that makes it all so much easier and more accessible. My favorite pastimes include 3D modeling and drawing, which have absolutely nothing to do with what I do, what my background is, which is project management and marketing. And that's probably why those are my favorite pastimes, because it really enables me to disconnect from my day-to-day work. And I'm a big fan of productivity. And for me, starting the day with really good coffee is the best way to have a productive day.
Cheers to that. Wow. So you've been an independent professional for 9 years. That's quite a good stretch, long before it was, let's say, in style.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's I've really seen how much freelancing has grown over the years. I had to learn everything by doing. When I started freelancing, I really had to figure out how to get clients and how to do everything. And I think the fact that Upwork is making such an effort to share from the community and help people learn faster and learn from experienced freelancers is a really, really valuable thing that we didn't have before.
Yeah, definitely. Now, before I dive into the rest here, a quick question for you that I like to pose to a lot of people we interview. When you first started as an independent professional 9 years ago, how long did it take for you to find your rhythm? I know from my experience, it took me about a couple months before I found any sort of continuity of work, but I'd say it was about a year before I felt really confident that I was on a successful path. How about you?
Yeah, so when I started, I was in college, and I started freelancing at the time simply because I didn't have time for a full-time job. I just ended up sticking with freelancing indefinitely. But I initially wanted to start working in SEO, and I had zero experience with anything. I was in college, and I could never got an SEO job at that time. I've tried that, I think, for a month, maybe close to two, and decided to rethink how I approach things, to think about, well, what can I actually do now that I don't need to show case studies of, I don't need to show past experience of, and then I can give clients the confidence that I can actually do this well. And that was for me social media management at the time, because I already had some good communication skills and I could prove that very easily. And I was right about that when I changed course and went for this thing that was a much better fit for me. I was able to get my first clients very quickly within 2-3 weeks maybe, or something like that. So that was the big aha moment for me at first, was that how easy it is also depends on what you go for. If you go for the types of projects that you're a really good fit for, you're probably going to get lucky faster.
Yeah, that's sage advice, and something that it took me a while to learn is how to select the job and how to select the client, even more importantly, which I believe we'll touch on a little bit later. So what we're going to be covering today is the benefits of working with enterprise clients, how to set ourselves up for success, what are these enterprise clients even looking for, and what are some valuable soft skills to practice and why they're important, and then how to think about expanding the value of your service, and of course, Q&A at the end here. So let's dive in. So first off, how long have you been working with enterprise clients? I know you've been in this sort of segment for 9 years, but how long specifically have you been working with those enterprise clients?
Well, I count Upwork as an enterprise client. So I don't remember if Upwork was the first one, but certainly it was around the same time. So I've probably worked with 3 big enterprise clients in the past 4 years, and 2 of them, one of them Upwork, and one other one started about 4 years ago.
Great. And for context for the audience, what is the difference between an enterprise client and a regular client, or a standard client, I mean?
Yeah, so enterprise client are the big companies, the multinationals, right? Fortune 500, et cetera.
Got it. And for context for the people in this event, when you are looking on the work marketplace, you can differentiate them from other ones by they have their little phone booth, blue phone booth icon on their job posting if it's public. So it looks like the TARDIS from Doctor Who, in my opinion. But you will know if you're dealing with an enterprise client, they will be clearly labeled. And yes, typically we find them to be a little bit longer term and maybe more complex in arrangement. You mentioned that you've been working with 3. So were these long-term contracts that you were working on, or was it like, hey, we need you to do a specific project really well and then see you later?
Well, actually, so here I can also speak from my experience hiring quite a bit. So, for me personally, I've always, and this is probably why I ended up working with multiple enterprise clients, is because I always focus on long-term engagements. I like to spend as little time as I have to doing things that I don't get paid for, and submitting proposals is something that I don't get paid for, right? So I like to look for long-term engagement because that means that I don't have to look for clients very often. And in actuality, I maybe look for new clients once every 2 years or something like that. So I don't spend a lot of time on that. Yeah, and this doesn't just apply. So for me, it's quite often been more ongoing type roles, but with enterprise, they always have needs. They always need quite a bit of work, right? So for instance, even if let's say I'm hiring somebody to create one time a set of banners, for print or something like that, chances are that if I really like the freelancer, I'm gonna need to create more banners for different campaigns in the very near future. So here, this is why it's super valuable and important for us to have good communication and build strong relations with our clients, because especially if they're big clients, there's a high likelihood that if they like you, they'll come back to you again and again. So even this to me applies not just for ongoing work, but even ad hoc work or on-demand work. If you build a good relationship and it's a big company, they're probably going to need to come. They're probably going to have more work for you on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I found it to be quite cyclical as well. I have definitely I have clients that need specific. I do graphic design freelance as well as being an event manager here, and oftentimes come trade show season, with the past 2 years exception, there's been I know they're going to need new flyers, new banners, new everything to look fancy for the big show. So it's getting to know the rhythms and making that good impression with the client will lead to them pinging you annually or however frequently they need to get that work done. And I love that point that you brought up about creating recurring business or longevity with your clients means you're not burning hours on unpaid pieces like sending out proposals, like interviewing, all these different things. Now, it's unavoidable when you're first starting, but I think a good benchmark, at least probably in both of our opinions, is to try and get those recurring client sort of model going. So I definitely agree with you there. I know when I was first starting, I was sending out about 30 to 40 proposals a week and getting very little in return because I was very new to the platform and hadn't really figured out my voice yet. And then now you mentioned you do it maybe once every 1 or 2 years. I'm down to about 1 or 2 a month, I think right now, which is a good feeling. And I find that when I put out a proposal now,
and this also is tied to what kind of work you do, right? So for the type of work that you do, it's obviously more natural that you have a lot more on-demand work. So I think that in your line of work, 1-2 proposals a month is really, really good, right?
Thank you. Yeah, I hope so. But the thing I like best is that I get a response on those 1 or 2 proposals, as opposed to before when I was sending 30 and getting maybe 1 response if I was lucky. So it's a common theme that a lot of people face, and for people that are new to freelancing that are on this event, hopefully this can be a bit of a breath of fresh air, knowing that yes, you are doing it right, even if you're not getting the responses you'd like just yet. It is a process, and you have to build.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
All right. So what are the primary benefits in working with enterprise clients versus standard? We talked about the long-term engagements, but what are some of the other key factors that make it a valuable or useful target to be aiming for?
Yeah, so for me, in this particular case, this might not be in every case, but I think quite often, and it's not just in my experience, but organized way of working is one that I think of because when you're in a position hiring for an enterprise, quite often you will know exactly what you want. That's kind of one of the differences. There are a lot of types of clients on Upwork, and of course, when you're talking to startups versus more established companies, startups kind of need a little bit of everything, and they're figuring a lot of things out. But when you're a very established company, you have processes in place, and you know exactly what you need. That also translates into how you manage your projects, right? So quite often when I'm writing a brief, I know exactly what I'm looking for. And it's not just me, probably a lot of people who are in my or in similar positions to myself are the same way. And I think that's a benefit because what it means for freelancers is you don't have to spend so much time figuring out what the client needs. Your chances of having a successful engagement with the clients are much higher when they have clarity, when they know exactly what they need and kind of what to expect from you upfront. And you just spend a lot less time, in this back and forth trying to figure things out. You can just focus on doing your job, which is, again, going back to what we said a few minutes ago, the thing that you're paid for and the thing that you want to spend most of your time doing.
Yeah. Now, do you find that because I know with enterprise clients, a lot of them are listed as private, not ones that you can just generally apply to, and oftentimes there is a Upwork account manager or representative that acts as that intermediary between the client and finding talents, shortlisting them. So do you find that typically when you get approached by whether it's a project manager internally or anything like that they have just a better understanding of the workflow and requirements, so there's less what I would call training of the client involved?
Absolutely. And that's a great point that you raised, that a lot of enterprise jobs are posted as private. And I also have been asked before why that is. And I always post them as private. And the reason why is very simple. It's because Upwork, for me, at least in my experience, has a great search engine. It makes it very easy for me to find great, qualified freelancers who are really great fit for the type of work that I need. And so I'd much rather post something as private, invite freelancers who are a really good fit, and then just focus on talking to them rather than making it open and then getting, quite often very many proposals from people and having to sift through and find the ones that actually do have the right experience, etc. So I think that's maybe one of the key reasons why people post jobs as private. It can also have to do with NDAs and not wanting to share details publicly with a large group. But yeah, that's a great point. And in terms of this is I'm gonna go come back to this in a later slide, but that's why your profile is super, super important, because the first step to getting an enterprise client is not the proposal, it's really your profile, because a lot of them are posted as private. So the number one thing that you need to do in order to get those kinds of jobs is to stand out in your profile and to really showcase your experience very well. Yeah, so I don't know if that really answered your question. Did it?
Yeah, I think so. Now, the next point we have here, opening the door to future opportunities. Now, you mentioned that with a lot of enterprise clients, in your experience, that there's been NDAs involved. My experience has been the same, and they've been different levels of severity, I'll say. But how do you leverage your enterprise clients? Is it in your portfolio? Is it in your profile? Is it just in your interview process where you mention it? How are you finding that you're able to leverage your experience with these previous companies, especially when they're locked down?
Yeah, well, the first way is because you actually have future opportunities from the same company. And for instance, let's say that you worked with me on a project, and right now I don't have a project for the same freelancer, but quite often what tends to happen is you have other people in the same organization asking, hey, I need somebody to help me with this. Do you have any recommendations? And word gets around it within an organization. So when you build a good relationship, you can have future opportunities come from different departments or different people in the same organization. And with regards to NDAs, one thing is regardless of NDAs, one thing we can always show, and that is what we know. That comes across in an interview, that comes across in our proposal, the way we talk about our experience, etc. So even if we can't, put in very detailed sort of case studies of what's the work that we've done, we can always leverage what is our experience, what do we know how to do. And you can always say that, hey, I've worked with enterprise clients before, I've done this kind of work before, here's kind of what my process looks like, and I'm sure that I can help you as well. So there are always some things that you can say that will help you, and obviously any enterprise client will be, it's always a benefit if you've worked with big companies before, because even if it was a different company, you kind of, it gives me confidence that you kind of know how these things go.
Yeah, definitely. And I think having been on the client side as well, I actually started my interactions with Upwork on the client side when I was working for startup tech companies, and I started hiring some people, and then I realized, wow, this is a lot of fun. I should be doing this. But it definitely gives you that viewpoint on what they're looking for. And I think one of the important things you mentioned earlier was the process of why you post privately. And I agree with you. Having been on the client side, you get, if your job posting is attractive and you have a decent job that there's plenty of people looking for, which is most of them,
Yeah,
you'll get inundated. I mean, within the first hour or 2 hours, maybe, I typically see 60 plus people responding saying, hey, and all of them sound great. They all have multi-paragraph, responses with portfolio items to check out. And at first I was like, oh my gosh,
yeah.
this is so much work. Because keep in mind, the clients that we're dealing with, they have a day job. This is supposed to be a quick, easy thing as part of their day. So it raises a good point on why many people would list it privately and not maybe put it out there. So they have to do all this work.
Exactly.
So next up, we wanted to chat about setting yourself up for success. And there was a quick question that came up that I wanted to bring up. This individual has worked with an enterprise client, and they're probably in the ramp down phase where that is ending. Is there a way that they can reach out to account managers or be on a short list to get in front of other enterprise clients? Are you aware of any sort of programs or groups that they should be contributing to or a part of?
Well, so one quick thing that I mentioned there is, if in the event when you get invited to another job, if it's a job from the same enterprise, don't assume that they know that you've worked with that company before. That's the first thing. So always make sure to mention that, hey, I've actually worked with this company before with your colleague X. Maybe you know her, maybe you don't, because it can be quite often that they will have no idea that you've worked with them before. And of course, it's a benefit if you've worked with the same company previously. In terms of, what can you do? Well, again, I can't speak for everybody, but I actually have a list of the freelancers that I like, that I make and maintain. And so whenever I have a need, I reach out to those freelancers, right? And sometimes they ask me if I have any more work for them, and I just have to politely respond that, sorry, not at this time. So I don't know if that helps. It doesn't hurt. It's not like it's bad in any way, but I don't think that people really forget about you, even if they're not currently working with you. It just may be that they don't currently have something for you. So
does it
that's
bother you
patience
on the
as well.
on the client side? So you as a client who's hiring independent professionals, does it bother you when independent professionals that you've worked with in the past reach out periodically every 6 months or whatever the case may be and say, hey, Kata, do you have any more work that I can help you with? Is that a good thing, a bad thing? Does it make them seem over eager? Or from your perspective, what do you see?
Well, so it definitely doesn't bother me. For me specifically, it's my communications with them during projects that convinces me if I'm going to go back to them or not, right? This is neither here nor there. For me, it really has no impact if they ask me if I have something for them. But yeah, it doesn't really, for me specifically, it doesn't make a difference.
Cool.
There are some people though. I mean, I have had somebody who I've shortlisted for a project and ultimately gave it to somebody else. And then that person every single week was asking me if I have different work for them. And that obviously that can get annoying. If every week you're coming back and asking for work, I do have a job. I do have something to do. So,
yeah, there's definitely use and abuse of that channel of communication.
Yeah.
Now, so we touched on this briefly before, that many enterprise job postings are set to private, invite only, meaning that you'll never see them on the workplace. When you're scrolling through, they will not show up. You cannot go and seek them out. Now, they typically leverage in either an Upwork internal account manager or their own project manager, like the role that you're filling, Kata, to locate applicable talent from the community to set up interviews with the enterprise client. So this means that you're being selected as part of that first screening process purely based upon your profile, your work history, and your portfolio before you ever get a chance to interview or write a proposal or anything like that. So
Yeah.
do you find that you need to present your profile overview in a different tone or voice than with typical clients when you're aiming at enterprise?
So I mean, yeah, absolutely. So first of all, it's a question of knowing your audience, and when you're working with, again, this goes back to understanding how different types of companies function, right? If you have a lot of experience working with startups, you may know that startups tend to need people who are flexible, can do a bit of more types of things. But with enterprise, again, they know exactly what they want, so they're looking for specialists. If I want a presentation designed, I'm going to look for a presentation designer, not a graphic designer, you know? So that's where you can really leverage your specialized profiles and really narrow in on your absolute top skills that you feel you're most comfortable in. You can do this work again and again and do it really well. And I want to also say what not to focus on, because I've, at least in my community, when I was an ambassador, so many freelancers obsessed about this, and that is the job success score.
Yes.
And some freelancers specifically obsess if it's not 100%. If it's, you know, I've had people complain if it's at 95% and saying that they're so annoyed and worried because it's 95%, it's not 100. People don't care. They, they really don't care that much. I've hired people with 87% success score. And I've never even, you know, thought about it twice or been even slightly concerned by anybody who has anything over 90%. I think we're all human beings at the end of the day. And I fully understand that just because you had a bad client in the past doesn't mean that you're a bad freelancer. So if you have anything over 90%, I don't think that people really care. And like I said, I've hired people with even less than that. If they convince me that, if they were super responsive, they're respectful, if they hit all the right marks, because, you know, sometimes it just happens that you have a bad experience with somebody. That doesn't mean that I'm going to have a bad experience with the same person. So that's
Definitely.
one of the
And
things that
yeah,
I wouldn't obsess very much about.
yeah, you raise a good point too. And there's also different clients for different folks. You know, some people like to work this way, some people like to work that way. I find
Exactly.
that in a lot of my non-enterprise clients that I go after, I put a lot of my personality in there, and that is very polarizing. Some people are like, oh, we love that goofy guy. He knows what he's doing, but he's having a laugh while he's doing it. And other people are like, nope, I'm not going to work with that guy at all. But I find that in that polarizing aspect, the clients that I do connect with, they're ongoing and they come back time after time because they like working with me. I do good work, but they like the process of my communication and the dynamic. I've been invited to offsite events by a lot of my clients. They're like, hey, we're doing a new office opening here. You know, come join us. And it's because I'm developing those relationships. Do you find that that is less a part of working with enterprise clients? Do you feel like you have to be a little bit more professional and sorry, word. I don't mean to say like clinical, maybe, I guess would be a word.
Um, no, I've never been. So here, I'll give you some examples. First of all, I think highlighting your personality is a good thing, because you want to, you know, we spend so much of our time working, and it should really be our goal that we enjoy working on the people that we're working with, and we should be selective about that. You know, that should be one of our criteria as freelancers. So I think that if you're, you know, showcasing your personality and the person doesn't want to work with you because of that, then that's probably not the right client for you anyway. It's, you know, that's a good way for you to filter out bad engagements. And so I think it's great to show your personality. You do think that you need to be professional. I mean, here's some examples of, I'm thinking actually specifically of one thing where I was like, you're lucky that you're talking to me and not the end client at the company.
Yeah.
Because I understand, you know, how freelancers are. And it was this person who I needed him to get on a call with me and the other client to talk about the project. And I asked them, you know, if they can do 10 a.m. The next day. And they're like, can we do 1 p.m. because I'll probably still be asleep at 10 or 11 because I work at night, and I'm, you know, I wake up really late. And I'm like, as a freelancer, I know that a lot of people, part of why they like freelancing is that they can make their own schedules, and that's great. But don't tell me you can't make the meeting because you're going to be asleep. Especially
Yeah,
when it's at 10
there's a
a.m.,
professional way of saying that. Like, I'm otherwise engaged.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Just say, hey, I don't know if I can make it at 10. Can we do 12? But don't tell me that you can't do it because you're asleep.
There is this thing as too much information.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So getting back to setting yourself up for success here, looking at some of the points here. One of the points that I wanted to bring out is keeping your portfolio up to date and making it visual. So for people in the design and creative industry like I am, it's very easy to make my portfolio visual. I just take what I've done and Photoshop it into a scene and slap it on the page and I call it a day. But for people that are in non-visual fields, like you're in project management, you're in data analytics, IT, or customer service, how do we make a visual representation of a portfolio to showcase?
Well, and here, the portfolio really is very important, even if you're not a designer, because it's the most visual, it's the thing that really stands out the most. And whenever I'm looking, through freelancers, that's the first thing that I see. And when I see somebody have a portfolio, it's the first thing that I look at. And even if like I've seen, creative things that I've seen from people, for instance, if they're in areas of where really you don't have something visual to showcase, like let's say customer support or anything like that. What people have done, they've just put, client testimonials, they put them into a design tool like Photoshop or Canva or whatever else. And they've just made it visual and put it on there and highlighted it. And it really catches, because I'm not going to stay and read the reviews, but if I see it there, I'm probably going to open it and that's going to inspire more trust. You can also think about interesting statistics to present about, your satisfaction with clients, or how many projects you've worked with, different ways that you can measure success that might make sense to people. For developers, what I've seen with developers is they highlight the applications that they've worked on. And I think that's fine because they say, like, they show screenshots of the applications, but they say that they weren't involved in the design, they were involved in the functionality, and they say what skills they had relevant to how they developed the functionality. So case studies, as long as you're not under a strict, as long as you're not under an NDA that prohibits you from showcasing that, client testimonials otherwise, and anything that you can think creatively to put on there. And what I would encourage people to do, if they're not sure what to put in their portfolio, is search for freelancers who have the same kind of background as you do, and look for ones who do have a portfolio and look, what do they put on there? How do they leverage that?
Yeah, definitely. Now, you mentioned doing a case study. What does that look like for you? What type of information does that include? Because as we mentioned earlier, you don't want to dump way too much information on the client because they'll just get like, well, I don't have time for this. So what are some of the typical things that you'll include in one of your case studies? What does that look like?
So I'll tell you what I had in my portfolio before I deleted it because it became irrelevant. But the reason why I actually got my aside from Upwork, my first other enterprise client was because of something in my portfolio, which was basically something that I made, kind of like an infographic around the steps you need to be sure to make when you audit when you do a marketing audit or a market research audit, and that's what sold it for the client, because it showed them that I know how to do this right. I've positioned myself as kind of an expert in the field. And then I later removed it because I stopped doing that kind of thing, or actually it became outdated. But I think that's the kind of thing where you can showcase your expertise, you can showcase what you know, in a way that has absolutely nothing to do with any of your NDAs, and also shows the kind of experience that you have.
Yeah, there's a really good question that just came up from the audience here. Do enterprise clients view videos on our profiles, or is a portfolio and static pictures the better way to go?
So I think it depends on what you do. It can certainly be videos, just as long as they're not long. I mean, again, for the simple sake of managing my time, if I see a 5-minute long video, I'm not going to watch it. If it's 30 seconds long, great.
Yeah, that is fair. And I would also probably argue that different people like to see things differently,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
and in different fields. Like if you're trying to hire someone for video editing, yeah, an intro video is a really good
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
You know, if you're trying to hire someone for an accounting job, probably less so. They probably would just
Yeah.
want to see some more stats and figures, just because generally speaking, that mind is typically geared more that direction. So I think it's maybe a bit of a variable, but I agree with you. Length and investment time from the recipient is an important factor.
Totally.
All right. What is this Hemingway app that you
Oh yeah, so
mentioned
I've
here?
I've actually been using that. I just always have it in my browser. I've had it for I've been using it for years now. It's a website app where it's kind of like Grammarly. I also have Grammarly. Just got used to using both. But it basically gives you, as you're typing, it gives you a score of how easy to read your text is, and it highlights, with yellow, red, etc., the words where your sentences, if they're getting too long, they show up in yellow, and if they're very long and hard to read, they show up in red, and they give you tips on words that you can cut out and things like that. So it's just been very helpful to keep myself as concise in communication and focused as possible, so that I don't lose people, so that I don't lose people with too much detail or with just complicating, putting too much text in one place.
Yeah. Another good question here I wanted to bring up, slightly shifting topics a bit, but if you have an existing 40-hour-a-week enterprise engagement on the platform, will you still get other enterprise interview requests? Is it based upon your hours logged, or is it based upon your availability that you put on your overview?
I think it depends from person to person and what the commitment is. If I'm looking for somebody to spend 20 hours a week for me, and I see that they're already engaged in a 40-hour-a-week project, I'm probably going to not pick them for that. If I need somebody's help with something that I think is going to take 5 hours a week, then I probably am. So it depends on what the needs are, basically, from the client.
Got it. Cool.
There are also countries, by the way, I don't know about America, but in Europe, there are many countries that have laws against people working, against giving more than 40 hours a week to people to work. So people in these countries are going to take that into account as well. I think Germany is one of them. I think in Germany, you can't make people work more than 40 hours a week.
Yeah, that's never going to fly in the US. We like to grind people hard here.
Yeah, I know.
And if you even suggest a 2-week vacation, it's like, no. That was a big part of my transition from the sort of corporate world to more freelancing side of things. I was like, you know what? I want to take a vacation when I want to take a vacation.
Yeah.
Dial this down.
The US is seriously workaholics, guys.
It's brutal. It is brutal.
Yeah.
All right, let me see here. Oh, good question here. When a client insists on a freelancer versus agency, is there a good way to address that? Like if they're specifically wanting one versus the other and you're not fitting directly in that category, but you think you're a good fit for it, how would you approach that?
I think that the only real way that you can change their minds is by saying, look, we're an agency, but you're going to be working with one person directly. You're not going to have like a middle manager or anything like that. So it's going to be the same as working with a freelancer, with the added advantage of, if this freelancer, gets sick or takes a day off, we have somebody who can help with, who can kind of replace them. That's the only thing. And if people are really stuck on saying, no, I want to work with freelancers, then I don't know. I let them,
But you're right, though. A common thing that people may shy away from is that there are, when a client is posting a job, they can set preferences. For example, preference that you've had 30 or more clients, and maybe when you're applying, you've only had 20 clients. It's okay to still apply. If you think you're a good fit, just make sure you address it, or from my opinion, make sure you address it in your proposal. You say, hey, I know you're looking for someone who's had 30 jobs on the platform, but I may have been doing this for 6 years prior, independent from Upwork, and I can bring in that information and be like, no, I have the resources, I have the profile to support it. So I would argue that don't shy away from going for a job if you think you're a good fit just because one of the preferences does not line up, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, let's move on to our next slide here. So we've discussed some of the benefits of working with enterprise clients and setting yourself up for success, but what are most enterprise clients looking for in regards to successful pairing with a freelancer?
Yeah, so I'll start with a bit of context. What are kind of the differences between when somebody's hiring for an enterprise versus when somebody's the CEO or close to that, like C-level person hiring directly? And the difference is that quite often when you're hiring for enterprise, you have other things to do. You're not going to be able to manage this person, very much. So you're looking for somebody who is quite self-managed, who can work reliably and responsibly without you having to direct them very much or check in on them and things like that. And that's why, to me, the first and most important thing is relevant past experience. So if you already have a wealth of experience doing the kind of thing that I need you to do for me as well, that's perfect, because it means that I won't have to tell you how to do your job. There will be a lot of clarity there. And sometimes I can also count on the freelancer to basically make good recommendations, especially because, for instance, I'm not picking freelance. My background is in marketing. I'm not just picking freelancers to work on marketing related stuff, right? So, and for instance, there are things that I know very well, and there are things that I'm not very good at, which is in my case, let's say design, right? So I'm always looking for somebody who can recommend what's the kind of best approach to take, rather than me have to know everything for them. So relevant experience, reliability. Again, one of the key differences. What's the difference when you're working with a client directly who's got his own company or is at the top level of the company? They're conscious of the finances of the company and how that's being spent, right? With enterprise, you get a budget, which is not your money. It doesn't affect me, yes, specifically seeing that money kind of go down. What does matter to me is that I can prove that I got the money's worth, that I used the budget well, that the project was successful. We didn't waste the company time and we didn't waste company money. So I'm looking for that confidence that this freelancer is not just going to do what I've asked them to do. They're going to do it very well, and they're going to do it on time. And there, that doesn't mean that people are going to be very strict. I actually think that people are super open-minded about time. And quite often, at least in my experience, people have been very open to give you as much time as you need to do your job, right? To be able to do it well. But I always ask in advance, like if I don't have a specific tight deadline by which something absolutely needs to be done, I ask the freelancer, how long is it going to take you to do this, right? And once you've told me how long it's going to take you, you have to commit to that. And I have to be able to trust that you're going to stick to that deadline, because otherwise it's going to cause problems for me, right? And I never want that. So it's so yeah, and I'll give you an example. At some point, I had shortlisted some people from a job. I was asking them more about their experience to kind of get a sense of who's the better fit. Instead of answering my questions about experience, somebody has just told me that they give me a 15% discount. That means absolutely nothing to me. If I can afford to pay you 100%, then I don't care about the 15% discount. I care about choosing the best person for the job. Right. So that's another, and that's a benefit of enterprise, I think. They're big companies with quite often quite a few resources, and they can afford to pay for experience. They can afford to pay for people who are really good at what they do.
Definitely.
Then it's communication skills. Again, going back to the same reasons, about reliability and experience. If I'll take another example, let's say that I've shortlisted 3 people for a job, and then I asked them some follow-up questions to see who's the best fit. And let's say somebody responds to me right away, somebody responds to me, let's say in 6 hours, and somebody else responds to me in 3 days. 6 hours is fine. Right away is great. 3 days is not okay, especially when I have choices, when I have more than one choice, right? Because what does that tell me? Well, it tells me that, well, if I need something done in 2 weeks, right, and you take 3 days to respond, then you may very well end up, causing delays in the project. Or if I need an urgent answer, I'm going to have to ask myself, am I actually going to hear from this person today, or do I have to wait 5 days for them to get back to me? So communication is really important. And again, sometimes people can ask for quite a bit of information that you can't give right away because you have to put thought into it. And there's a very simple solution to that. You can just say, hey, I got your message. Thank you. I'll put some proper thought into this and I can get back to you by tomorrow with a proper answer. Is that okay? You know, and that to me says that you are reliable, you are responsible, you know, you've seen my message and you've responded to it. Even though you haven't given me the details right away, you've had a very good reason to not do it. So yeah, it makes perfect sense to do that. And then another one is, and again, you know, I've you know, thought of more here, but doesn't have to be all of them in one. They're just all kind of things that I look for typically. And process is a good bonus one that I see sometimes when I reach out to somebody and, you know, let's say a video needs to get done. If they also highlight what they want their first steps to be, what they're going to need from me, what are they going to do first? You know, are we going to have a first draft? How many revisions do they typically include? Things like that. Again, this creates that sense to me that this person has done this many times before. They know what needs to be done and they're ready to start right away. So that's a good one. Past results is same as relevant experience. And again, it ties into if you get another offer for somebody at the same company, don't assume that they know who you are. Don't assume that they know that you've worked with the company before. So always highlight that. And other enterprise work is basically that, basically what I just said.
Yeah, definitely. Now, a good question here that I wanted to bring in is an in-depth proposal or a concise, quick proposal best when applying to enterprise contracts?
You know, it always, and this doesn't just apply to enterprise, it applies to any kind of client on Upwork, I think. It depends very much on the type of person that you're dealing with. If somebody posts a very short proposal and it's kind of vague and not very clear, then it can mean that maybe they don't like to, you know, take a lot of time to write things. It can mean that they just prefer to communicate directly. And so for those types of clients, when they don't go too much into detail, then it probably works better to just say, hey, I've read this, I'm interested, I think I have the right experience. Should we schedule a call and when are you available to talk about it more? When somebody gives you a detailed brief and it's very clear that they know exactly what they're looking for, then I think that it's wise to address the points in their detailed brief. Because it can also seem like, you know, if I'm taking the time to put together a detailed brief and really lay out everything that I need and have specific questions for you, and the response I get is, hey, sounds great. Should we talk on a call? You know, I made a lot more effort than you did on that on that initial engagement. So that's a little bit odd to me.
Yeah, I find that a good sort of rule of thumb is to mirror what the client has put. Obviously not one for one, but if they're writing an in-depth thing, you might want to go a bit more in depth. And if they're brief, sort of mirroring, you know, a sales technique, mirroring the client, I find to be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see here. Got quite a few good questions here, so we'll try and get through these last slides to get plenty of Q&A here. Let's see. All right. So one of the topics we discuss frequently in many of our events is soft skills and how important they are to success as an independent professional. I host a Talent Toolbox series of events where we focus on these types of topics, typically presented with one of our Upwork coaches to provide guidance from their expert experience. What are some of the most important soft skills you've found when working with enterprise clients?
Yeah, so very much tied to the points made before. I think that communication is one of the top things that we can all practice as freelancers, regardless of what we do, because we're working with people at the end of the day, and being good at building relationships and maintaining relationships with the people that we work with is gonna, you know, it pays so much down the line because it means you get more recurring work. You enjoy your work better when you're working with people who like engaging with you, right? So it's always a great thing to practice is how we communicate with people. And very quickly, you know, here just a little bit of advice. Everybody obviously should do it in their own way, but for me, you know, I think it's always good to be friendly, professional, and don't take too long to reply, right? As we've said before. Even if you can't do something right away, let your clients know that you've read their message and let them know when you can follow up in detail. And with regards to written and spoken English, of course, if you're talking to clients in a different language, great. But if you're talking to clients in English, then it's fine to, like, I always overlook a little mistakes that people make in our discussions in chat, because even if you're a native English speaker, you can make some mistakes here and there. But I think that in that first phase, of first qualification phase, when they're looking at your profile, that's something that you really should put in time, right, to review before you finalize it. So if you have errors or if you have things in your profile that don't make a lot of sense, that is going to raise a little bit of a flag, potentially, with people thinking, am I going to have a language barrier with this person, right? And that also comes across as well in communication. Like if I'm asking somebody, if I'm not really quite confident that they understood what I've said, and I asked them to clarify something, and their response is simply, "Oh, don't worry, yeah, we can do it," doesn't reassure me. And of course, that is one thing that people do want to avoid, is a language barrier, is not having the confidence that you understand each other, right? So practicing your English, if you're not a native English speaker, I think is very, very valuable, and it can help you secure more types of clients from more countries.
Definitely.
Negotiation technically goes without saying, but somehow I've ignored it for like the first 6 years of being a freelancer. So I put it in here. And what I mean there is, I actually thought, after 5 years of being a freelancer and also having worked with an agency and helping secure clients for them, and basically writing proposals every single day for like, a company of 30 people. I thought that I was pretty good at that, because I've done it so much. But as I've started to actually look at lessons and books into negotiation, I realized how little I really know. It's not something that you necessarily just learn by doing. It really does pay to practice negotiation on a very active level and learn from people who are experts in this, because negotiation doesn't just mean negotiating your prices. It can also mean everything else in your engagement to clients. It can mean the difference between allowing yourself to have days off and not doing that. It can mean saying, I'm not going to have client calls after 6 p.m. my time. I'm not going to have client calls in the evening, and all kinds of things like that. So you can also negotiate on delivery speed, right? And that's where you can also earn more. If you have the types of clients who are always in a hurry, they want something done tomorrow, it's something that you can charge extra for, right? And if they say, I don't want to pay extra for this, then great. Let's increase the timeline. Yeah, sure, I can do this for the original price, but it's going to take a week, not a day. Right. So availability for meetings is another thing. Some people, I see them, get stuck in meetings every single day. And I try to limit that as much as possible, right? You shouldn't have more meetings than you actually need to be in. And if you're in a meeting, you're just listening and not actually contributing in any way or taking anything out of it, maybe that's not a meeting that you need to be in. So I've always been conscious of that as well. And you can also, secondary services and much more. So when you're working with existing clients, you probably don't just have one type of thing that you do for a living, right? So learning how to upsell and keep them engaged and keep working with them on other types of needs that they may have is also a great benefit. So those are my thoughts on negotiation. And also for those looking for references, I've at a generic level, you can find some places to get started on Udemy. You can find some decent negotiation courses there. My favorite person to follow on negotiation is somebody called Chris Voss, whose background was that he was a hostage negotiator for the FBI for his career. So yeah, he's got to be pretty good, right? And he has a masterclass on negotiation on masterclass.com, and also a book. I forgot the exact name, The Art of Negotiation, I think, or I forgot. But anyway, Chris Voss, and you'll find the book, and it's really great tips there. And finally, time management. Being great at time management is really a selling point in and of itself, and it opens up your day to more activities, right? So one of the ways in which you can charge higher is if you're really quick, if you're really good, if you can do something very quickly, right? And if I can say that, I can do it in an hour, something that takes somebody else a day, then that's a massive selling point and a great reason why you should pay me 3 times as much, right? And it also means that I can squeeze a lot more work into those however many hours you want to work every day. So getting good at time management is great. Well, not really old, it's from 2008, but a great book on time management that for me at the time was The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. That's kind of opened up my mind to being a lot more consciously aware of how I spend my time on things and trying to constantly simplify and cut anything that doesn't add enough value. and that's been super useful. And then for anybody interested in time management tools, my favorite right now is Coda.io, which is similar to Notion. Trello is also a decent one, but I find in Coda that it's a lot more customizable and I can do a lot more with it. But yeah, I think those are the key soft skills that I think have helped me personally the most. And I'm always looking for, with people that I work with, always looking for somebody with good communication skills.
Yeah, it is so important. No matter what type of work you're doing, if you don't communicate well, it's going to hinder you quite a lot in your success.
Yeah.
So another important topic we speak on quite frequently is creating value and better understanding your worth in the marketplace. This can be via upskilling in a specific direction. This can be the soft skills that we were just talking about that you're bringing into the relationship with the client. So what are some of the tips on understanding the value of your service from your perspective?
Yeah, so it really, this depends very much on what type of work that you do. And me specifically, I've always tried to orient myself into doing the kind of work where I can track the value of it, right? So I knew that I wanted to work in marketing, and the way that's evolved over the years, I've done more and more marketing automation and more advertising, paid advertising, because those are fields, subfields within marketing where you have an ability to really track the value that you're bringing through your work, and to really scale on that value and shift the conversation away from time, from how many hours you're spending on something, to what's the actual value that you're bringing to the company. But this doesn't just apply to marketing, and it doesn't just apply to things where you can track financial benefits. I think that regardless of what we do, it's good for us to think about what are the metrics by which we can track our success, and to put ourselves in the client's shoes to try to understand not what value does my service have to me, what value does it have to my client. Because for instance, writing an article, for you, it takes you the same amount of time maybe. But if you write it for a startup that has 0 views on their blog, it's going to have a value. And if you write it for a massive publication, that's where it's going to be seen by maybe thousands of people at least, then it has a significantly different value proposition, right? So always keep that in mind. It's not about what your service, what the value is of something to you. It's about what the value is to the potential client that you're speaking to. And you can be creative about this. Even if, for instance, if you're a developer, you can think, okay, if you're working on an application, what is the value of that application potentially going to be to the client? That's why developers get paid so much, right? They do on average compared to other fields. And it's because if a product that they build performs well, it can bring tremendous, financial benefits to their clients, even if you don't specifically track at the time of working on it what that value is going to be. You can understand what the market value of it is, of that type of service, right? So regardless of what you do, that's what I would try to look into, is figuring out how does your potential client think about the value of your service? How are they going to weigh what it's worth to pay for, right? And focus on selling it with that in mind.
Yeah, definitely. Now, another sort of related to this, let's determine that you need to raise your rates. How do you go about having that conversation?
Yeah, so it depends very much on where you are. So if you're working with the same client and you've been working with them for a while, and you've decided that now is the time to raise your rates, I got this tip from some people who are career negotiators. That's what they do. They negotiate and they train people on that. And that is that it's not a zero-sum game. It's not an all or nothing game. And people are afraid to ask for rates because they're afraid of losing their clients. But it doesn't have to be that way. So you just have to prepare for it and think, okay, I want to raise my rate by X. What can happen? Well, they can say yes. They can just give me the rate, and that's great. They can say no. Why might they say no? And if they say no, what's my response going to be? Is it going to be that we can't work together anymore? Because it can also be something else. It can also be, okay, I can continue to work with you for the existing price, but we need to cut our time commitment into half or something like that. Or instead of me taking 1 week to deliver something, it's going to take 2 or 3 weeks, right? Or, okay, we can't increase it by how much I want, but let's find a middle ground where I'm working a little bit less and charging a little bit more. And you know what that is. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing when you go in and ask for a raise. Just think about what are your What are your other options? How can that discussion go? And when you're prepared for it, I think you lose a lot of that fear of asking.
I love that. And it's so true. I was terrified to raise my rates at first. I was like, I'm going to lose all this traction and this regularity of work that I'm getting just by requesting that I get paid what I'm worth. And you know what? I've yet to lose a client in that
Yeah,
conversation.
exactly.
And
Because
I've
people
raised my
don't.
rates quite a few times.
Yeah, yeah. And we tend to have a one-sided view of things. We tend to think only of, oh, if I lose this client, this is going to affect me. It's the
Yeah.
same for clients. I don't want to lose a person I've been working with for a long time who's been doing a great job. I have to find somebody else that's going to take time. I don't know if I'm going to find somebody who's as good, or, I don't know if I'm going to find somebody who's as good at the same price. So if I have to make a choice between continuing to work, let's say with Will, right, and raising his rates, or going to find somebody new and potentially having to give them higher rates because that's what they charge at that
Right.
level of experience, of course, I'm going to choose to keep the person that I'm working with.
Absolutely. Now, I know we're coming up to time here, Kata. Do you have time to go a little bit over with Q&A, or are you on a hard stop?
Yeah, no, absolutely. People are still
Cool.
staying on.
All right. Yeah. If anyone, I understand if people have to jump off, I'm going to drop the link here for the recording so you can catch any of the rest of it here. This link that I'm sharing in the chat, it's not just where you can find this recording in a couple of days once it's loaded, but also the previous events where we talk about how to write killer proposals, how to dial in your communication, how to make sure your overview is looking really sharp. Check it out, bookmark it, get it tattooed on your arm, whatever makes it work. All right. It's a good link. So let's dive into some of these Q&A. So one of the things that was coming up was, how to be more visible to the search process for enterprise clients. And I know that there's such programs as Expert Vetted and Talent Scout. These are some of the programs that perhaps will put you more on the radar. Have you ever been a part of those groups, or have any experience working with people in those groups?
So my only experience with that is I know people who are in them and people who apply to them. I don't honestly have more experience beyond that, unfortunately.
No problem. I know from my experience that the Expert Vetted and the Talent Scout are quite visible to the matchmaker sort of account manager types internally to Upwork. Some of those are invite only, some of those you can apply to, but we do have events and information about that in our support section there. So I'd recommend checking that out to find out what those look like. Also, there's a new program through our Academy. For those that are not familiar, Academy is a new initiative launched with some educational materials, but through there is also the cohorts, which is a sort of, think of it like a virtual classroom that's going for a specific period of time, where you and a small group of people will have access to the Upwork coaches, and you'll be able to talk to them directly and be like, hey, why is this proposal not working? Or, what's wrong with my profile that it's not getting the responses? And it's free. Highly recommend you check it out in the community section in Academy. Let's see here. What would you recommend to freelancers that have two different professions? Like if they're vastly different, like a data engineer and then graphic design. Is it good to have those two different segments, or do you think it's best to focus on one? What do you think is a good way of approaching this?
Yeah, personally, I think it's best to focus on one. Just because, look, I have a very hard time trusting that somebody can be just as good at two things. And if I'm looking at engaging a person, I'll have no idea, is graphic design the thing that he's better at those things out of those two, or is it the other one and I'm making a mistake, So I would focus. I mean, it's completely fine, for instance, if you're a designer and you're doing app design and banner design, that's great. You're a designer. That's your main skill set, and that you can have two specialties within that. But where they're vastly different, I think that it can raise some questions for clients, and not all of them, but I think that you're going to miss out on some clients by going that approach, because I myself would ask myself, are you really going to be good at the thing that I'm looking for, or at the other one?
Yeah, I get you there. I had to narrow mine down quite a bit. I do graphic design, and then my two specialized profiles are branding and deck creation, which are very niche, but all under that same umbrella. So it's at least there's a continuity of what I'm presenting there when they're looking through my portfolio.
Exactly.
Now, a couple questions around this topic. So I'm going to paraphrase to umbrella get these. How do you find what skills you should be upskilling? We talked about earlier, upskill into lucrative areas. How do you know what those are? How do I determine what I should be going to learn?
Well, I mean, I think that it kind of comes with the territory, right? So it's going to be very different for developers compared to me, where my background at least used to be in marketing, right? So it depends on your market, but I think that again, you can research that. You can research who are people that have kind of a similar who work in the same industry as you, but they charge $200 an hour and you charge 50. That's kind of how you can decide what's the trajectory, that you can go into. So I think that's, and it also comes, I think, with experience. When you when you have been doing your job for years, you just start to understand your market better, and you start to see who are the people that your client is hiring as your manager. What are people doing that is your client cares the most about, and that are making the biggest difference in the company.
Yeah, got it. Now, there's been a couple of questions around NDAs and how to leverage it in your portfolio. And we touched upon it briefly earlier, where you can talk to measurable statistics in what you've done. But what are some ways that you can, when you finish working with an enterprise client, or maybe just a segment is completed, what are some of the ways you can approach leveraging it in your portfolio? I know personally, I start by just asking, hi, I just created this document for you. Is it all right if I use it in my portfolio? And when they've said yes or no, I say, do you need me to modify? Are there any specific aspects you need me to change? Like one of my clients specifically said, we don't want our specific brand or company name tied to it. So what I did is I just changed the logo to Acme Inc. and, Acme Inc. and then put in there, the name has changed, obviously. And then they were fine with the rest of it. But any tips that you found in trying to be able to leverage those without triggering the client that you're not going to respect the NDA?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, it very much depends on the specifics of your NDA. And that's because that
Yep.
gives you a lot of clarity on what you can and can't use. Some people will be very specific in the NDA to say you can't use the brand name. And other people will not say that. They'll say specifically that you can discuss, internal communications, et cetera, or the scope of what you do, things like that. So it's starting from really knowing your NDA. And working around it. You have options. For instance, if a client doesn't have a problem with you sharing that you've worked with their brand, but they do have a problem with you sharing any other details, then you can just put the name of the brand, right? You can put it in your list of clients or in a visual format without saying anything else about it. If it's more like what you have said, Will, then it's exactly like you said. So it's really based on what specifically the NDA is. And the first step, of course, is asking your client what they think. There are going to be cases where the client can't tell you. Like if somebody asks me, what can they share? I'll be like, yeah, don't ask me. I'm not going to put myself on the line and say, yeah, sure, you can share that. I'm not going to get myself in trouble. So it depends on those clients as well.
Got it. And one thing that I think you'll have more experience in this than I do, but I know that in for non-enterprise clients, when they are putting up the job posting, they're required to put a budget. And oftentimes the clients that are posting on the non-enterprise side may not have a good gauge on what it costs. There's always a famous thing, oh, this will just take 5 minutes. I'm like, there is literally no graphic design project that takes 5 minutes. I promise you that, not a good one at least. So yeah. Is how much more, so with that being said, when a client on a regular job posting says, $20 an hour, and I have no problem then saying, no, I will do this for $50 an hour, and here's why. I have no problem doing that. But on the enterprise side, do you find the pricing to be a bit more rigid and well thought out, or do you still do that same workflow?
Yeah, I absolutely avoid as much as I can to impose budgets. I think that makes no sense. I know, if there's a maximum, but generally, if there's a maximum that I can spend, then I'll keep that in the back of my head. I won't even communicate that. But I'm always looking for freelancers to give me the proposition, because I want to know, what they're going to be comfortable with, and I'll decide based on that if it's too much for me or not. And I'll decide not based on me specifically what I think about it, but based on what the market says. And quite often freelancers who have similar experience, I found quite surprisingly often they charge very different rate, very similar rates, even though they don't know each other or they're from very different countries. In my experience, people are kind of know their market.
That's good. Yeah. Now, so it's been asked a couple different ways, and from the client experience side that you have, when you're looking at the people that have applied to the jobs that you've posted, if someone has relatively little experience and they're new to the platform, does that person still have the ability to make it onto your radar and get an interview? Or if not, what would you suggest for these people in order to reach that point?
Well, it depends if they because I also got this question before quite often is, what if I have almost no experience on Upwork, if I'm new to Upwork, but I have a lot of professional experience in the past? And I say that's 100% relevant. And I have hired people who have had, $500 in earnings on Upwork, who have just started on Upwork because they were able to convince me that they knew exactly how to do their job and they have had great experience from the past, and they ticked all those marks about communication and so on and so forth. And so I don't think that clients, or not all clients at least, they don't specifically care about how much experience you have on Upwork specifically, but how much experience do you have overall, and overall, how good a fit are you? Because at the end of the day, that's what I want. I want somebody who I know is going to be the best person for me to choose out of the pool that I have available. Where they've gotten their experience matters a lot less. But if you have no experience at all, or you have very little experience, it's going to be harder to start with enterprise probably, but that's fine, because I've been a freelancer for 9 years. It's taken me probably 5 or more or 6 to get my first enterprise client. That was never really an objective. It just sort of happened. And I've had a great time in the past as well. I've worked with really great clients where the communication was great, payment was good, and it was aligned with my experience level and how much value I was delivering. So, there are benefits to working with enterprise, but if you're still new to freelancing, you can still have a great experience being a freelancer, even though maybe it's going to be tougher to get your enterprise client at this stage.
Yeah, I would agree. My personal advice would be something along the lines of focus on getting some rep on the platform. Get some 5-star reviews, get some great testimonials, get some portfolio items, get some robustness. Because as you mentioned, one of the major difference, and I would agree with you from my experience working with enterprise versus standard client, is the enterprise client is sort of expecting you to know all the mechanics and being able to just hand you the thing and then you run with it and do what you need to do, versus maybe a startup company that's like, hey, we don't really know what you're doing. Do you know what you're doing? Let's figure it out together. And they're happy to have a little bit of that back and forth, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, there's still quite a few questions here, but a lot of them are more like personal account leaning, so I'm not going to dive into those. I will drop a few links here just as we close out the session. So here is a link again to where the recording will be available in a few days. It's not just this recording. Again, this is all the Talent Toolbox events, other expert speaker events, really valuable information on the inner workings of Upwork, how to dial in different aspects of it. And then I'm also, as we close out this session, just as it's important to get to reviews and feedback from your clients once you close out a job, I have a link here as we close out the session where you can provide some feedback on what's helpful, what's not helpful. This really helps me dial in what sort of presentations I can put together to help you all. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you so much for spending your time with us and sharing your wisdom. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for the invite, and it's great to get so many great questions and to be on.
Yeah, well. Thanks everyone, and don't forget also there's our Upwork community where you can continue these types of conversations, talk to other professionals in your industry, and it's a really robust and supportive community. I highly recommend you check it out. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll catch you next time.